Well, yes, thank you, everybody. This is a brief run through the Connected Cities methodology, which, as you can see, we rather gladly claim to be a global sustainable development strategy, and I trust you will see why in due course. Now, let me begin by clicking on that. Oh, success, yeah. Well, it's a strategy that's designed to accommodate growth, and the growth in terms of population is really quite substantial. In the UK, we are predicted to have nearly 80 million people by 2051 and to exceed 90 million by 2081. So we've got to think quite hard about where these people are going to do and how they're going to live their lives. The other great problem, of course, that everyone is aware of is greenhouse gas emissions. And this is simply a diagram that indicates that things are getting worse. The biggest, sector in terms of producing greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see from the diagram on the right, is transport by a large margin. And so to some degree, it doesn't matter how efficient the houses you build are, if the people who live in them live very unsustainable lifestyles, you are still got a big problem. The good news that's on this diagram is if you look on the far right-hand side, it gives you the percentages of the greenhouse gas emissions that come from various different modes of transport, and rail is tiny. Rail carries 11% of passenger miles, but only produces 3% of the transport's greenhouse gas emissions. Walking, of course, produces relatively little in the way of greenhouse gas emissions, so it's a tiny amount. This particular diagram also gives you some indication of how efficient as a means of transport in terms of capacity the various modes are. And the bottom two lines, as you will see, is that walking is extremely efficient mode of transport. You can get a lot of people around, and rail is extremely efficient. So, Connected Cities starts with the premise that there should be public transport at the heart of all new development, and that we should encourage active travel by every means that we can. And effectively, this means that it should be possible to walk from wherever you live or wherever you work to a means of public transport, and to do so in comfortable, pleasant and congenial surroundings, or to cycle and so on. I suppose you could row, that would be quite nice. We focus our attention, therefore, on the 1 kilometre circle around railway stations. They don't have to be railway stations, they could be BRT stations or something of this kind, but we do have an existing rail network, let's use it. The diagram on the right is purely about what the 1 kilometre circle looks like. The red curve represents the railway line. Hello? Is that me making that?
No. Sorry.
Hello?
Just carry on, Brian.
Carry on, Brian.
We're still running. Okay, fine. Yep. Yeah, the red curve represents a railway line. The centre of the circle represents the location of a railway station. The radiating, well, not all radiating, some of the radial, yellow lines represent active travel routes that are made comfortable and easy for active travel. And the brown lines represent vehicular travel. So you will note they do not go through the middle. Now, we're not the first person to come up with this diagram and these kind of ideas. There was a man called Ebenezer Howard about 100 years ago who did something really profound and substantial. And he promoted the idea of the Garden City, which, when you look at it closely, is actually a walkable settlement with about a 1 kilometre radius. But then it's set in countryside. That's very important. And what's more, he envisaged these not in isolation, but functioning in groups linked by electric railways. Very important in those days, they were electric because, of course, non-polluting. And a large push of the Garden City movement was to get away from ghastly industrial pollution and to give people somewhere healthy and easy to live. So Connected Cities takes this idea and applies it to the existing rail structure and the existing towns. And a connected city is actually a federated group of towns who've chosen to come together so they can plan and function as a whole. And in this instance, what we're saying is that the maximum travel from the core of this city, the hub town, to the edge would be 15 minutes. And all development would take place within 1 kilometer, of a railway station. The black circles represent existing railway stations, and the green circles represent potential new ones. Now, with this diagram, we're looking at a real place, and the dotted orange line indicates the perimeter of existing towns. Developments within this connected city would be not at the edges of the existing towns, but within the yellow ped sheds, which are around existing stations, or in new green ped sheds around new green stations. Within a ped shed, there are a set of principles that guide in broad terms how it should be developed. Once again, the curving red line represents the railway. Either side of that are commercial uses and so on. The countryside which one trusts around it is intended to be brought into the core of the city, settlement, sorry, not city, into the core of the town by these green wedges. Immediately around the railway station, you have an area of high density mixed use and public. So essentially, you're talking about apartments over shops, offices, and the like. The bulk of the residential, though, occurs in family residences of low rise and comparatively low density, and they're represented by these pink villages. So this is purely diagrammatic, but it's the principle. The housing demand which we have to actually accommodate is quite substantial. I mean, we're talking about an additional 18 million people by 2050 and 21 by 2080. The thinking behind connected cities is that all of these people have to be accommodated somewhere, and we want to ensure that the somewhere minimizes carbon production, minimizes congestion, and actively encourages health. But to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, if you were to house 21 million people in Howard's garden cities, which are about 30,000 each, you'd need something in the region of 700 garden cities. That actually is entirely practical. It's not as terrifying as it sounds. This is analysis of Southeast England. We conclude that there could be up to a potential of 100 connected cities. It could easily accommodate an additional 10 million people. And the land take involved in that would be less than 3% of Southeast England's undeveloped land. Within each of these red dots you see represents the hub town of a potential connected city. The new settlements that we're talking about would be linked to these hub towns, and so there is real potential for capacity there. To zoom in a bit, this is the Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge corridor, as you can see, which has a dozen or so potential connected cities in it. These are they. Once again, the yellow circles represent development around existing railway stations. The green represents development around potential new railway stations. One of the benefits of this is that you can then say to the country as a large, okay, you as an area, your potential connected city area, you have to be prepared to take your pro rata share of this growth that is coming. Where you choose to put it, it's entirely up to you. However, if you decide that you don't want to take this pro rata share of the growth, we're very happy for you to assist financially with it being taken somewhere else where somebody does want it. Quite how this mechanism would be driven, we're not quite sure, but I suspect it would be in the case of your council tax would go up and the money would be relocated through central government. But nevertheless, the general principle that each area has to take a long-term view of what they're going to do over the next 30 to 50 years is right at the core of this. Because one of the problems we have with our current system is that local authorities only have to plan for 5 years. 5 years isn't enough to justify new developments, but new developments are really the only practical solution forward that isn't going to exacerbate the problems we already have. So, quick zip through here through a real situation. This we call the first connected city, simply because it's the first one we looked at and analysed. There is historical reason for it, but I'll skip the joke. It's based around Stevenage, a town in Hertfordshire with a population at present of about 90,000. Close to it, but connected by the railway, are Hitchin, an old market town, Letchworth, which was the first ever garden city, and various other smaller towns. Together they have a total population of around 225,000. In order to accommodate growth, of their pro rata share of the predicted growth for 2050, they're going to have to find somewhere to put 70,000 people. And the question then will be, where would they do it and what effect would they have? So very quickly, if we look at simply building and densifying around the existing stations, there's potential there, but it's not enough to accommodate 70,000 people. If we were to fully develop around all the existing railway stations, including areas of the surrounding landscape that are currently green belt, then it would be just about possible to accommodate 70,000 people. If we were to actually build 2 new towns around new railway stations, then again they'd all be linked together, and they would have the advantage of they'd have access to the local hospital and they all the shopping facilities and work facilities, etc. So they wouldn't be completely new towns. They'd be new towns that were integrated from the outset. If we were to do that, yes, that can just about accommodate the 70,000. If, on the other hand, what we do is we build extensions to the existing towns at the point where the railway runs between the town and the surrounding countryside, and we put new stations there and build new areas around them, we can easily accommodate the 70,000. In fact, we can do more. This particular connected city could start taking in substantial growth beyond its pro rata share of the national. Just to quickly zap through matters global, as you probably know, 2.4 billion people due by 2050. India is about to become the most populous country in the world. And so we did a study of Tamil Nadu, which is the southernmost part of India, which has had astronomical growth. Chennai, which used to be called Madras and is the main city in that area, it had 64% growth in 10 years. So you can get some idea of the chaos that exists there. Fortunately, they have a very good railway system. And so we started to do analysis to look at where this connected cities methodology might apply to that situation. And what we focused on was an area called Tirunelveli, which is way down south. It contained the district contains around 3 million people, but the city, which is at the point of the crossing of the red lines you can see there that represent railways, that's got a population slightly over 500,000. Again, zooming in, the yellow circles once again represent the 1 kilometre radius PED sheds around existing stations, and the green represent potential new stations and new settlements. Looking at an existing town and seeing how this diagram fits on top of a real life situation, this is a town called Petai. It has a good station at present. It has very limited service. It only has 5 services a day. So there's a huge opportunity to increase the rail traffic through it and to provide the kind of frequently responsive public transport that's needed. But again, it's got the green wedges there. It has the commercial area either side of the railway, and it has potential for new housing. The large areas of blue relate to the fact that this is, of course, affected by the monsoon, and a large chunk of what one has to accommodate in southern India is to design in such a way that one collects the water that lands during the short but very intense rainy season. and incorporate that into the green landscape and not flood the town with it. Also, it gives an opportunity to decrease the enormous pressure there is on water resources in the area. This is potential location for a potential new settlement. Once again, we've looked hard at where the water currently collects during the monsoon and kind of design the spaces around that, which we feel must be the way forward. Should you like to know more all about this, we do have a book. It's available free of charge and can be downloaded from our website as a PDF, or if you wish to buy a hard copy, you can. And this is our website. If you want to Google it to track it down, do please write in Connected Cities as all one word, in which case we turn up at about number 2 or 3 on the page. If it's 2 separate words, we're on page 136 or something. So please, Connected Cities, all one word. That's it. Yeah. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. So, questions?
If the word town began in the English language with the sound s, as in sea, would it also be, could it be kind of connected towns?
Yes, well, in fact, we do use the word connected town for the individual towns within a connected city. I mean, I can give a much longer presentation if you wish, but I thought I'd try and keep it to its bare bones.
I'm just thinking kind of because Lewis, we're a town, but we're not a city.
No, absolutely. You would, I mean, I've not done the analysis around Lewis, but you would probably find yourself a town within a larger connected city.
Yeah.
You might even be within Brighton connected city, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Greater Brighton, yeah.
It spoke to me in that context, but I was just wondering how towns fitted in with how, because in your list of towns below Stevenage, some of them were pretty small, 4,000 population.
Oh yes, absolutely that. Yeah. I mean, one of the core of this is that the group of towns wants to come together in order to function. We don't intend that this should be compulsory. What is proposed is that there should be a new Cities Act, which pulls together a lot of existing legislation and adds a bit of new one, so that it's something which groups of towns can adopt if they wish to. If they wish to, they will get a lot of powers and a lot of borrowing power, which come with forming themselves into a connected city. It will give them access to government grants, it will give them access to low-cost loans, but they will have to obviously in some way conform to the design guide of a connected city, because the whole focus is to achieve highly sustainable and very healthy development.
Thank you.
Brian, can I ask a question about the train service? I take your point that it has the lowest carbon footprint of any of the means of transport, and you showed that shot of Stevenage, the map of Stevenage and Hitchin and places like that. Is there the capacity? So if I understand it, what you're saying is you would need very good services between those small towns.
Indeed.
Is there the capacity to deliver that along with the faster routes through those cities? If you see what
yes.
I mean.
The answer is, thank goodness, technology is coming to our rescue. The digitization of the railways, as it's called, is making it possible to run trains much closer together and faster. And that's a rolling program that's slowly spreading out across the whole of the UK. Fortunately, Sir Peter Hendy, who is the new chief executive of Network Rail, stood up at a conference about 4 weeks ago and said, I come from London Transport, where we're used to running a very high frequency railway service. This is what the country needs. From now on, our goal is going to be the metroization of the big railway. So suddenly we have a champion right at the heart of Network Rail. But yes, it is a challenge, and it doesn't take just the signalling system, although that's really the thing that's holding it back at present. It does take a certain amount of real physical infrastructure as well to make sure that you don't have at-grade crossings when the points aren't working efficiently and things like that, which is what currently tends to greatly inhibit the capacity in the rail system. Yeah.
The at-grade crossing is the spell that is killing that connection from Cambridge to Norwich functioning in the way you describe.
Yeah. But as I say, the metroisation of the railways is precisely what we feel is necessary. And actually, this is a great argument for HS2. I mean, until very recently, one of the things that nobody's talked about, but is vital, is that HS2 releases a huge amount of capacity on the existing legacy lines.
Yeah.
It takes the long, fast trains away, and they're the ones that bugger up the system, and it puts them on their own dedicated high-speed link. It's not to say there wouldn't be any long-running trains up the East Coast and West Coast main lines, for example. But what they would do is they would probably stop only at the hub towns of the connected cities they pass through. And so they'd be a kind of medium high-speed system, whereby the super high-speed system ran on HS2. The freeing of capacity is quite staggering. According to a diagram that was produced by Rail Engineer magazine earlier this year, the East Coast main line would have 60% of its capacity relieved by the building of HS2. Nobody talked about this, and yet it's right at the core of the long-term strategy which is necessary to decarbonise the country, because railways are right at the core of decarbonising all our transport system.
Would that...
On that happy note, and it being 7 o'clock.
Right, okay, yeah.
I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously there's an awful long way to go on this, Brian.
Yes, indeed.
Next stage is, what is the next stage, and is there anything that our Green Group should be doing to help it?
Well, a very interesting point. I mean, we'd like support in all directions. We are currently operating on about 3 fronts. I mean, as far as Tirunelveli in southern India is concerned, we're working there with people to develop a chap called Nick Falk has already organised and built one eco house. We're now trying to get the funding together to build an eco neighbourhood, with a view to eventually creating an eco city, as it were, a connected city in Tirunelveli. So right now we're engaged in applications to Innovate UK and Welcome and people like that. With the Welcome one, it's specifically about modelling, using computer modelling systems to determine which layouts of urban form create the healthiest cities. So it's completely tied in with what Marit was talking about earlier. So that's all happening in India. In the UK, we're still hammering away at trying to encourage government to adopt these ideas. Unfortunately, since the government keeps changing every 20 minutes, that's proven slightly more complex than we imagined. But it does really give an opportunity. We're hoping to organise an event in the beginning of 2020 in Hertfordshire, focused on looking at all the potential connected cities in Hertfordshire, of which there are 9. I only showed 1, obviously. And we'll be doing that with the New Garden Cities Alliance and the University of Hertfordshire, if everything goes well. We're also looking at a potential event with the University College London. I'm right this minute still trying to get Peter Hendy to be the key speaker on that one. Because
Fantastic.
the
That would
one
be
thing
very, very interesting.
Yeah, the one thing that we have yet to successfully do is penetrate the rail industry. It's an extraordinarily complicated business. I've been at it for nearly 10 years, and I'm slowly beginning to make some kind of inroads into it. So anybody who has any help and assistance at all with the rail industry, I would be hugely grateful if you can point me in that direction. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got anything you'd like to say other than thank you very much to Brian?
The 60% that would be freed up, does that have immediately used up by different types of more local services, or is it actually kind of going once it, in theory, has been released by HS2? When you
No, well, what will happen is that once HS2 actually starts operating and it releases, I mean, they will begin to run all sorts of new services on the legacy lines, as they're called, the existing ones. At present, they're struggling to run more trains. I mean, what's happened is the rail industry is buying trains at an enormous rate. I mean, there are 5,000 new trains that have been on order and are due to be delivered in the next 5 years. And they're trying to increase the number of services because the demand has been going up for a long time and is continuing so to do. The problem is that they're pushing now against the limit of what they can actually do. However, and this is one area where Connected Cities offers a solution to them, which is the real pinch points are as you come into the major metropolises. So as soon as you go 20 miles or more out of the major metropolises, you got spare capacity. There aren't trains running all the time. The difficulty is... Hello?
The same bye-bye to Jeremy.
Oh, right, okay. The difficulty is that as they all focus in on the termini in Birmingham, the termini in London, the termini in Manchester, etc., you start to run out of capacity. But there is a real opportunity for running additional services that don't run into the metropolises, and that can be done now.
Okay, so Orpington could become a very exciting, not quite London destination.
No, yes,
that's
much more
very
likely would be the Medway towns beyond.
Absolutely,
So,
but we're getting the point.
Yeah,
we're getting the point.